All right, we're getting now a ton of new information on Hurricane Matthew. We have the 5 o'clock advisory early, so this is an update to the overall strength of the storm, which has not changed. Wind still at 120 miles per hour, still a major hurricane, Category 3 status. Good to see, though, at least at this point, we haven't seen any kind of a quick strengthening taking place, but it's still going to be over a relatively open water here as it makes that bend back toward the Florida East Coast through the day tomorrow and tomorrow night. In terms of the forecast cone, let's see what's changed. We got this in just a few minutes ago, and it looks like the cone has shifted just a tiny bit west, just a slight nudge to the west here, and you can see it bending a little more westward just north of here, and that's the trend we've seen with some forecast models perhaps showing a landfall along the Florida East Coast, especially closer to Cape Canaveral, perhaps as a major hurricane, a Category 4 storm. Now, let's talk about the timeline. The timeline has not changed much. It looks like by 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, based on this latest advisory, the core of the storm begins to approach southeast Florida and then works parallel to the coast, making a scrape along the coast. It looks like there's a good chance now, unfortunately, the eye wall will scrape along the Florida East Coast and perhaps bring severe hurricane conditions there along Florida's East Coast. Now, here's something that is new, some new alerts to tell you about. Tropical storm watches now issued along the Gulf Coast of Florida. This includes parts of Lee County, up through Charlotte County, Punta Gorda, Port Charlotte, down the coast of Naples. So tropical storm watch colored in yellow. That means that tropical storm conditions in terms of tropical storm force winds that would be up to around 40 miles per hour are possible tomorrow into Thursday night, where you see the area colored in yellow. As you go deeper inland, the colors in orange, those are tropical storm warnings in effect for inland sections of Collier County, Hendry County, Glades County, and Lake Okeechobee right now under a hurricane warning, and that's the area we're most concerned about, where we could see some hurricane force wind gusts closer to Clewiston and up through Lake Okeechobee. So again, if you're just joining us now, parts of the Gulf Coast of Southwest Florida have been put under a tropical storm watch. Now, here's a look at the timeline based on our latest high-resolution forecast model on how things will unfold as we go through the day tomorrow. You can see the storm sort of creeping into the picture as we go through the mid to late morning on Thursday. So this is when we're going to start to see some of these feeder bands, some of these cells racing on shore, producing some of those higher wind gusts along the Florida East Coast, and some of those will make it and rotate into Southwest Florida. So we could see some wind gusts by the time these cells make it over here, getting closer to perhaps 40 miles per hour or so. We could see some higher wind gusts deeper inland, closer to Clewiston, perhaps closer to around 60 miles per hour. And again, all this varies greatly on the exact track of the storm. So if the storm were to move a little bit farther to the west, even a distance of about 20 or so miles, that can make a big difference. And unfortunately, that's the challenge when you have a storm that's moving parallel to a coastline. Now, as we head through the day on Friday, the storm will start to pull away from us heading up toward Cape Canaveral, but we're still going to see some of these rain bands start to come in from the northwest. Now, you can see we're not looking at widespread soaking rains for Southwest Florida, but we're going to see hit or miss downpours, some of these tropical downpours that can produce some higher wind gusts, and also some of those wind gusts outside of some of these cells that come in. Now, I just put this new forecast model together showing the rain potential. And here's the challenge with this forecast is there's going to be such a sharp cutoff, a sharp gradient from interior parts of the peninsula and the Florida East Coast compared to what we're seeing here in Southwest Florida. So if you look at our rainfall projections through late Friday, anywhere from 1 to 2 inches, perhaps less, in some areas, but if you had just a few miles off to your east, closer to Lake Okeechobee, we could see closer to 5 inches and perhaps closer to 5 to 10 inches along the Florida East Coast. I think the main thing that you're going to notice here is the winds ramping up as we head through the day tomorrow. Nothing we can't handle here closer to the Gulf Coast, but sustained winds coming in around 20 miles per hour. That will certainly get your attention. And if you have any plans to do any boating, you shouldn't do any boating through the day tomorrow, because especially in the open waters, we're going to see some stronger gusts. You can see that with the yellow color here. But notice the big difference here along the Florida East Coast. Hurricane force winds. You head a little bit farther to the storm's western periphery, and we're looking at sustained winds anywhere from 20 to 30 miles per hour with some wind gusts perhaps closer to 40, and even stronger as you get closer to Lake Okeechobee. We are not expecting to see a storm surge here in Southwest Florida. That's going to be along the Florida East Coast, mainly due to the orientation of the winds. The winds will be coming in for the most part out of the north, and typically you don't have a big storm surge threat with that. Now, On to the next phase. We've been getting a lot of questions about what happens with the storm once we get to about 4 to 5 days out. Well, I think it's important first to concentrate on what's going to happen over the next 48 hours, and that's going to be possibly a landfalling hurricane over the Florida East Coast with some fringe effects here in Southwest Florida. Once you get into next week, the forecast is highly uncertain. There's been some forecast models wanting to take a much weaker system back toward the Florida East Coast, and some models take it out to sea. So at this point, and the forecast is very uncertain. So don't get too excited or concerned about this loop. Let's focus first on the next 48 hours, and because this could look completely different by this time tomorrow. So tomorrow, be prepared to see some gustier winds, some pockets of heavy rain rotating in as early as the mid to late morning. And then as we head through Friday, we'll continue to see some fairly breezy weather with some showers coming in. The heavy rain threat mostly along the Florida East Coast. And then as we head into the weekend, we're going to see some improving weather here across Southwest Florida. Now, there's a lot to cover. Robert Van Winkle will have a complete breakdown of the latest information that we just got in with Hurricane Matthew, an update on the tropical storm watches that were just issued, and some of the new forecast models we're seeing coming up on the News at 5.
All right, thanks, Jason. Real quickly, traffic alert here.